History's legal codes are basically the world's oldest, weirdest user agreements. Nobody reads the fine print. And when you do, it's full of clauses so insane you'll wonder how humanity made it this far. So we rate it for you. Here are 50 of the most absurd, hilarious, and downright terrifying laws ever enforced. From legally mandated kidnappings to a death sentence for writing bad poetry. By the end of this, you'll feel a lot better about your own government. Or at least slightly less furious. 1. In ancient Sparta, the lawgiver Lycurgus instituted a bizarre marriage ritual that looked a lot like a kidnapping. An aspiring husband had to ceremonially abduct his bride from her family home. The bride's maid of honor would then shave the bride's head, dress her in men's clothing, and leave her in a dark room. The groom would sneak in, consummate the marriage, and then sneak back to his military barracks to sleep with the other soldiers, a routine he had to maintain for years. Their dating scene was less dinner and a movie, and more covert special operation. 2. Ancient Athens had a law that would make for an incredibly awkward family dinner. If a man died without male heirs, his daughter was legally required to marry his closest male relative, often her own uncle or a first cousin. This wasn't about romance. It was about keeping the family property and wealth consolidated. The daughter, known as an epikleros, wasn't an heiress in the modern sense. She was more like a human vessel through which the family estate passed to the next male in line. Imagine your dad passing away and your inheritance comes with a legally mandated husband you've known since birth. 3. In 14th century France, animals could be taken to court. And we're not talking about a slap on the wrist. They could be formally charged, tried by a jury, and even executed for their crimes. The most famous case involved a pig that was arrested for mauling a child. The pig was provided with a lawyer, held in a prison cell, and eventually found guilty. It was sentenced to be hanged in the public square, dressed in human clothes for the occasion. The court records meticulously detail the costs, including the price of the pig's new execution outfit. 4. If you think your government gets weird about regulating substances, consider the Ottoman Sultan Murad IV. In the 17th century, he completely outlawed coffee. He believed coffee houses were breeding grounds for political dissent and social decay. The punishment wasn't a fine or a warning. The first time you were caught sipping a cup of joe, you were beaten. If you were caught a second time, you were sewn into a leather bag and thrown into the Bosphorus River. Talk about a serious caffeine addiction. Offers 5. From 1881 until as late as 1974, the city of Chicago had what were known as the Ugly Laws. These ordinances made it illegal for any person who was diseased, maimed, mutilated, or in any way deformed so as to be an unsightly or disgusting object to appear in public. It was essentially a legal ban on being visibly disabled or unconventional looking. The goal was to prevent able-bodied citizens from being offended or disturbed. It was a brutal piece of social engineering that treated human beings like aesthetic problems to be hidden away. 6. In ancient Rome, the principle of patria potestas, or the power of the father, gave the head of the family absolute life or death control over his children. This power was so extreme that a Roman father had the legal right to sell his own son into slavery. However, there was a strange loophole. If a son was sold and managed to gain his freedom, he would return to his father's control. But the law stated a father could only do this 3 times. After being sold into slavery for a 3rd time, the son was finally considered legally free from his father. A terrible system, but with a bizarre 3 strikes you're out rule. 7. In medieval England, the job of an ale conner was a real and legally mandated position. Their job was to test the quality of beer. How? By pouring a puddle of it onto a wooden bench and then sitting in it while wearing leather breeches. They'd sit there for a while, and if their pants stuck to the bench when they tried to stand up, it meant there was too much sugar in the ale, and the batch was deemed low quality. This wasn't just a party trick. It was a consumer protection law enforced by professional beer sitters. 8. If you think fashion police are bad now, 14th century England had them written into law. King Edward III enacted sumptuary laws that regulated everything, including the length of your shoes. Specifically, the pointy tips of shoes, called poulaines. A commoner was forbidden from wearing shoes with points longer than 6 inches. A gentleman could have points up to a foot long. But for the nobility, the sky was the limit, with some wearing shoes with 2-foot-long points that had to be tied to their knees with chains just to walk. 9. One of the earliest known legal rulings on copyright comes from 6th century Ireland, and it sounds like a proverb. St. Columba secretly copied a valuable book of Psalms belonging to his former teacher St. Finian. Finian found out and demanded the copy. The dispute went all the way to the High King, Diarmait Maxerbel. After hearing the case, the king gave a beautifully simple verdict. To every cow her calf, and to every book its copy. He ruled that the copy belonged to the owner of the original, establishing a legal precedent for intellectual property over 1,000 years before the printing press. 10. In the ancient Greek city of Thebes, there was a law that held artists to an almost impossible standard. If a sculptor or painter created a public work of art, it had to be a perfect, idealized representation of its subject. If, upon completion, the city's officials judged the work to be inferior to the original subject or concept, the artist was legally required to pay a massive fine. Even worse, if their statue or painting was deemed better than the real thing, they were still fined for the crime of setting an impossibly high standard. You literally couldn't win. 11. In 16th century England, King Henry VIII introduced a beard tax. Yes, a literal tax on facial hair. It was a graduated tax, meaning the amount you paid depended on your social standing. A commoner might pay a few pence for the privilege of sporting a beard, while a high-ranking nobleman would have to cough up significantly more. The law wasn't just about revenue. It was a way to enforce social hierarchy and make sure everyone knew their place, right down to the hair on their chin. Suddenly, the modern clean-shaven corporate look seems a lot less oppressive. 12. For several centuries in medieval Germany, a married couple could legally settle their disputes through a trial by combat. But this was no ordinary duel. To ensure a fair fight, the man was placed in a hole up to his waist with one arm tied behind his back. The woman was free to move around the edge of the pit and was armed with a pouch containing 3 rocks. The man had a club. The fight would continue until one person surrendered. It's probably the only historical legal process that sounds like it was invented by the Looney Tunes. 13. In the Massachusetts Bay Colony during the 17th century, the Puritans legally banned the celebration of Christmas. From 1659 to 1681, anyone caught exhibiting any kind of Christmas spirit, feasting, avoiding work, or even singing carols, was slapped with a 5-shilling fine. Their reasoning was that Christmas was a decadent, pagan-rooted festival with no biblical justification. They saw it as a day of wasteful indulgence rather than pious reflection. Meanwhile, somewhere, a Fox News host just fainted. 14. In Iceland, a law based on centuries of tradition dictates how last names work, and it's nothing like the rest of the Western world. Instead of a family surname passed down through generations, Icelanders use a patronymic system. A person's last name is created from their father's first name, followed by son for a son, or daughter for a daughter. So if a man named John has a son named Olafur and a daughter named Sigridur, their full names would be Olafur Jansson and Sigridur Jonsdottir. In Iceland, your last name doesn't tell a story. It just points a finger at your dad. 15. The ancient Greek lawgiver Zaleucus of Locri was known for his brutally literal legal code. When he decreed that the punishment for adultery was to be blinded in both eyes, his own son was soon caught in the act. Faced with the choice of either breaking his own law or inflicting total blindness on his child, Zaleucus came up with a third option. He ordered that his son lose one eye, and that he himself lose one eye. He upheld the letter of the law. 2 eyes were taken, while demonstrating a strange and savage form of mercy. Justice and a loophole, all in one gruesome act. 16. In 13th century Wales, the laws of Hywel Dee set out the precise legal value of a cat. A kitten from birth until it opened its eyes was worth 1 penny. From then until it killed its first mouse, it was worth 2 pence. Once it was a proven mouser, its value shot up to 4 pence, a significant sum. If you killed a cat that guarded a village's barn, the penalty was even steeper. The cat's owner was entitled to a fine of 1 ewe with its lamb and wool. Even 800 years ago, people knew you don't mess with a cat person. 17. In the United Kingdom, it is, to this day, technically illegal to die in the Houses of Parliament. This isn't some ancient superstition, it's a piece of legislative genius rooted in pure bureaucracy. The logic, if you can call it that, is that anyone who dies within the palace walls is technically entitled to a state funeral. To avoid the logistical nightmare and immense cost of holding a state funeral for every politician or tourist who has an unfortunate accident, they simply made it illegal to expire on the premises. How they enforce this? Beats me, but I'd love to see them try. 18. In 1696, England implemented the infamous window tax. It was a property tax where the amount you paid was based on the number of windows in your house. The government's logic was simple. More windows means you're richer. The public's response was equally simple. They started bricking up their windows to avoid the tax. This led to countless homes becoming dark, damp, and poorly ventilated, which doctors at the time blamed for widespread disease. Trust the government to find a way to tax fresh air. 19. In the Aztec Empire, sumptuary laws were taken to the extreme. It was strictly illegal for anyone from the common class to wear clothing made of cotton. Cotton was a luxurious fabric reserved exclusively for the nobility. Commoners were required to wear rougher garments made from agave fibers. If you were a commoner caught wearing cotton, the punishment wasn't a fine or public shaming. It was death. It really gives a whole new meaning to the phrase fashion victim. 20. Across Anglo-Saxon England, the law of frank pledge created a system of mandatory collective policing. Entire communities were divided into groups of 10 households called a tithing. If one person from the tithing committed a crime, the other 9 members were legally obligated to bring him to justice. If they failed to produce the culprit in court, the entire group was heavily fined. It was the historical equivalent of being stuck in a group project where if one person messes up, everyone gets an F. 21. The 12 Tables of ancient Rome contained one of the most brutal debt collection laws ever written. If a person owed money to multiple creditors and couldn't pay, the law gave those creditors the right to physically cut up the debtor's body and divide the pieces among themselves. Historians debate whether this was meant literally, but honestly, who cares? The fact that this was even on the table as a suggestion is insane. Suddenly, that final notice from your credit card company looks less like a threat and more like a friendly reminder. 22. According to the Greek historian Herodotus, ancient Egyptian authorities had a law requiring the builders of the pyramids to eat a daily ration of garlic and onions. This wasn't about a passion for flavorful food. This was the world's first state-sponsored wellness program, designed to prevent disease among the workforce. It's like your boss offering a free salad bar, except the salad is just raw garlic and the job is building a tomb for a god king. Now get back to that limestone, Steve. Your performance review is coming up. 23. In 13th century Florence, a city obsessed with its public image, it became illegal to have a picnic or eat on the steps of a church. This wasn't about respecting sacred ground. The city's elite were just sick of seeing commoners making the place look untidy. So they didn't just ask people to move, they made enjoying a sandwich in the wrong place a punishable offense. Florence. Come for the art, get fined for the sandwich. 24. In the ancient Greek city of Locri, the lawgiver Zeleucus instituted a rule for anyone wanting to propose new legislation. You had to present your idea to the public assembly with a rope tied around your neck. If the assembly voted your law down, an executioner standing by would immediately tighten the rope and strangle you on the spot. The idea was to force people to think very, very carefully before suggesting a change. It's the most brutal, yet effective anti-spam filter in political history. Imagine how short Congress sessions would be. Just imagine. 25. You've heard the story of King Canute commanding the tide to stop. But this wasn't about arrogance. It was a legally staged masterpiece of political theater. His court was full of sycophants telling him he was all-powerful. Fed up, Canute had his throne placed on the beach and ordered the tide to halt. When the waves inevitably soaked him, he turned to his court and essentially declared them all idiots. He didn't just tell them they were wrong. He made planet Earth do it for him. Now that is how you win an argument. 26. In medieval Scotland, sanitation laws were creative. With no sewers, you threw your waste out the window, but to make this chaos slightly more civil, the law required you to shout "Gardy Loo," a corruption of "watch out for the water," a split second before you let it fly. This wasn't a law against throwing filth in the street. It was a law that established the legal difference between assault and a friendly, very disgusting heads up. 27. Under Old English common law, a disturbing principle known as the rule of thumb existed. This unwritten law permitted a husband to physically discipline his wife, but the stick he used could be no thicker than his own thumb. It was a grotesque attempt to quantify and therefore legitimize domestic violence. It's a chilling reminder that some of history's worst ideas came with a ruler. Literally. 28. In the Belgian city of Ypres, the Festival of the Cats had a barbaric main event. The law, or at least accepted custom, was for the city jester to throw live cats from the belfry tower to the square below to kill evil spirits. They stopped in 1817 and now use stuffed animals, which is a significant improvement. But you have to wonder what ideas got rejected at those early city council meetings? Seriously, what was Plan B? 29. When Oliver Cromwell took over England in the 17th century, he legally declared war on fun. A law was passed that banned all stage plays and shut down every theater. They saw theater as a source of immorality. It was the governmental equivalent of your dad unplugging the Nintendo because he heard a swear word. Except the Nintendo was all of art and culture, and your dad was a military dictator who ruled for 18 years. 30. The ancient Hittite civilization had one of the strangest legal codes ever discovered, listing fines for everything. But the truly bizarre part was its laws on bestiality. Sex with a horse or mule. Not a capital crime, you just couldn't appear before the king. But sex with a pig? That was a death sentence. No exceptions. There's a backstory there. A really, really disturbing backstory involving a pig that we are all better off not knowing. I'm just going to go ahead and not ask. 31. The 12 tables of ancient Rome also had some very specific rules for funerals. One of the most peculiar was a law that banned women from wailing excessively or scratching their faces in grief. This wasn't an attempt to promote stoicism. The Roman elite felt that loud, public displays of mourning were performative, undignified, and, worst of all, a tactic used by powerful families to show off how many devoted followers they had. So they regulated it. Nothing says, "We feel your pain," like a decibel limit. 32. The crime of jaywalking didn't exist until the 1920s, and it wasn't invented for safety. It was invented by the car industry. As automobiles started killing thousands of pedestrians who had always had the right of way, the auto lobby launched a massive PR campaign to shift the blame. They staged safety parades, got newspapers to mock jaywalkers, and lobbied cities to pass laws restricting pedestrians to crosswalks. They literally invented a crime and then shamed people into obeying it. So next time you hesitate at a curb, remember, you're not following a safety rule. You're obeying a century-old marketing campaign. 33. In 1518, in the city of Strasbourg, a woman named Frau Trophäa stepped into the street and began to dance. She didn't stop for nearly a week. Within a month, over 400 people had joined her in the dancing plague. The authorities were baffled. After consulting with physicians, they reached a legal and medical consensus. The cure for the fever was more dancing. They cleared out guild halls, built a stage, and even hired a band, legally prescribing that the afflicted should literally dance the fever out. It remains the single worst piece of public health advice in human history. 34. The Republic of Venice in the 15th century had a shadowy intelligence agency called the Council of Ten. Their power was absolute, and their methods were direct. Official records show the council had a budget and a formal legal process for hiring assassins to eliminate political enemies using a special kind of poison. They kept detailed price lists for poisoning different ranks of officials, from a Turkish general to the Holy Roman Emperor. It was state-sanctioned murder for hire, complete with itemized receipts. The original government contractors. 35. In ancient Rome, wearing the color purple was a dangerous game. A specific shade, Tyrian purple, was legally restricted to the emperor himself. The dye was absurdly expensive, extracted from thousands of tiny sea snails, and came to symbolize ultimate power. Senators could wear a stripe of it, but to don a fully purple toga was to declare yourself either an emperor or a dead man. Imagine being so powerful that you own a color. Not a brand, not a logo. An actual color. That's not style, that's a statement. 36. Ancient Athens had a brilliantly paranoid democratic process called ostracism. Once a year, citizens could vote to exile any politician for 10 years. No trial, no charge, no evidence required. You just had to be unpopular, too powerful, or just plain annoying. Citizens would write the name of their least favorite person on a piece of broken pottery, an ostracon. If any one person got 6,000 votes, they were banished. It was the world's first unfriend button, except clicking it meant packing your bags for a decade. 37. In medieval England, a 13th century law known as the Assize of Arms legally required every able-bodied man between the ages of 15 and 60 to own and practice with a longbow. And they had to do it every single Sunday after church. This wasn't a hobby, it was a mandatory military training program to ensure a constant supply of expert archers to fight the French. Imagine being forced by law to skip Sunday football to practice archery, just in case your neighbor got any bright ideas. Suddenly, jury duty doesn't seem so bad. 38. In 17th century colonial America, the Puritans were not messing around when it came to church etiquette. Several colonies had laws that specifically forbade chewing tobacco in church. The fascinating part isn't the ban itself, but the loophole. It was often perfectly legal to chew tobacco during the service, as long as you didn't spit on the floor. Some churches even had designated spitting corners. Even the people who banned Christmas knew you don't separate a man from his vices. You just micromanage them. 39. In 1516, Bavaria enacted the Reinheitsgebot, or the German beer purity law. It decreed that beer could only be made from 3 ingredients: water, barley, and hops. This is often hailed as the world's oldest consumer protection law, but it had a hidden genius. By banning brewers from using wheat or rye, the law ensured that those precious grains were reserved for making bread, preventing food shortages. Leave it to the Germans to solve a potential famine with a law about beer. It wasn't just a rule, it was a sacred contract between a people and their 2 favorite foods. 40. A brutal English maritime law known as the Law of Wreck stated that if a ship wrecked on the coast and everyone aboard perished, its cargo legally belonged to the local landowner or the crown. However, if just one person, or in some versions even a single cat or dog, made it to shore alive, the original owner could reclaim their property. This created a rather grim incentive for coastal dwellers to not be too helpful when they saw a struggling sailor. A law that turned every shipwreck into a life-or-death game show for the survivors. 41. In Tudor England, under King Henry VIII, the government legally regulated the size of your codpiece. Yes, the English Parliament spent actual time debating and legislating crotch padding. As the fashion for larger and more prominent codpieces grew, a law was passed to limit the amount of stuffing one could use. This wasn't just about modesty, it was a status symbol. It was the 16th century equivalent of a dude stuffing his dating profile with pictures of a Lamborghini he doesn't own. Except the Lamborghini was attached to his pants. 42. In Vermont, an old and bizarrely specific law made it illegal for a husband and wife to whisper to each other in bed. The rationale behind this is completely lost to history, which honestly just makes it better. What could possibly be so threatening about pillow talk that it required legal intervention? Whatever they were whispering, it must have been one hell of a conspiracy. 43. The Philippines has a law that effectively criminalizes being a gossip. Under the revised penal code, the act of intriguing against honor, which basically means spreading rumors or unverified stories that damage someone's reputation, is a punishable offense. The local slang for a gossip is a marites, and this law is essentially the government's official anti-marites weapon. It's probably the only country where spilling the tea could land you in court. 44. Under ancient Scottish law, there was a specific crime called clamhew. This law applied if you struck a man, and the strike was so severe that it drew blood, but you did it without a weapon. So, a simple punch that broke the skin. If found guilty of clamhew, you were fined based on your own social rank. The higher your status, the bigger the fine. It's a legal system that basically says, we know you're going to punch each other, so let's at least figure out the paperwork beforehand. 45. In Wisconsin, America's dairyland, there are surprisingly strict laws about butter. It's illegal to serve a butter substitute like margarine in a public establishment unless the customer specifically requests it. Furthermore, all butter served and sold must be graded for quality by an official, state-licensed butter grader. Imagine having a job where your sole professional duty is to judge the quality of butter. That's not just a career, it's a calling. 46. In British-ruled India, the government faced a venomous cobra problem in Delhi. To solve it, they offered a bounty for every dead cobra. The plan worked brilliantly at first. Then, enterprising citizens started breeding cobras specifically to kill them and collect the reward. When the government realized they were being scammed, they canceled the bounty program. The breeders, now left with thousands of worthless and very venomous snakes, simply released them. The final result? The cobra population in Delhi was even higher than before. This is now known as the cobra effect, the perfect term for when a solution makes the problem exponentially worse. 47. For over 900 years, the English town of Dunmow has upheld a tradition called the Dunmow Flitch. It's a custom where a married couple can stand trial to prove they have lived in perfect harmony for a year and a day, without a single argument or moment of regret. If they can convince a jury of 6 bachelors and 6 maidens, they are paraded through the streets and awarded a flitch, which is a giant side of bacon. It's a beautiful tradition, but also the most English thing ever. The ultimate prize for marital bliss is pork. 48. Since the days of Napoleon Bonaparte, there has been a law on the books in France making it illegal to name your pig Napoleon. This was enacted to protect the honor and dignity of the emperor from being associated with a farm animal. While the law is no longer enforced, it has never been officially repealed. So technically, somewhere in the dusty legal codes of France, the reputation of a pig is still a matter of national security. 49. For centuries, English law had a principle called mortmain, which literally means dead hand. This law prevented people from leaving their land to corporations, especially the church, in their wills. The fear was that because a corporation never dies, the land would be locked up forever, never returning to the market or generating tax revenue for the king. Even the dead couldn't keep their hands off the land. All right, we've covered 49 points and only one remains. But before we get to our grand finale, it's time for the final verdict. In our opinion, the award for the most unbelievable law from today's list goes to the German trial by combat. Why? Because it's the only legal proceeding in history that sounds like it was storyboarded by Wile E. Coyote. A man in a hole, a woman swinging a bag of rocks. It's pure, unadulterated legislative madness. Do you agree with our verdict? Or did another law deserve this dubious honor? Let us know in the comments what you think. And now, our final number, 50. The 12 tables of ancient Rome didn't just worry about debt and funerals. They were also terrified of poetry. The law stated that if a person wrote a satirical or defamatory poem about another citizen, what they called a carmen famosum, the punishment was death. You could be beaten to death with clubs for writing a mean limerick. It was the ultimate form of cancel culture. A society so terrified of a sick burn that they made it a capital offense, proving that for all of history, the pen truly has been mightier and far more dangerous than the sword. And that's 50 more reasons why human logic has always been a work in progress. But now it's your turn. Head to the comments and pick the single most barbaric, idiotic law from this list. Then try to defend it. Yep, make your best case for the indefensible. Let's see how clever you really are. And while you're down there, don't forget to subscribe. History's weirdness isn't done with you yet.